Hello everyone, my name is Albert Bustillos and I am currently a cybersecurity major here at NAU and this is my fourth year. Before this, I was in the Army for 19 years. In the first 8 years of that, I served as a track vehicle mechanic. After that, I was given the opportunity to change my job to IT support. And after I had changed my job to IT support, I was then stationed in Hawaii, in Honolulu, at a base called Fort Shafter. And there for about 2 months, I worked as IT support for a division level organization. And during that time, I was noticed by a lieutenant colonel who had told me that he had picked me to become part of a team that they had in Hawaii called the DCE, which stands for the Defense Coordinating Element. Now, I had never heard of this organization before ever, but after I had heard about this and learned exactly what they do, is that I found out there is at least 8 different of these organizations throughout the military, and that the Army spearheads this by running this organization. So what happens is that the Defense Coordinating Element works alongside FEMA and creates what they call mission plans. And these mission plans are basically scenario-based situations that they will use to apply analyst strategies that they would use to apply to any damage that might happen to critical infrastructure, either through natural disaster or terrorist attack. But for the most part, they practice for natural disaster. And the reason why the Defense Coordinating Element was created was because of a situation, as Erswald stated in 2006, that the wake of 9/11 hurricane helped policymakers execute and become more motivated ever to reduce the vulnerabilities in our social and economical systems. And these events reshaped how we approach infrastructure protection, highlighted the need for strong partnerships between public and private sectors. So this is where the Defense Coordinating Element has a role in all of this, because the military can provide support to FEMA, Homeland Security. But there's one major problem and flaw with this, is that the military takes time to mobilize and deploy their resources in the event of a terrorist attack or even a natural disaster. But still, they plan and prepare. And what I learned from this is that before FEMA requests any help from the military, they use the private sector. And that's how I know that the private sector plays a crucial role in providing security for our critical infrastructure and protecting and hardening as best as possible, assessing risk to our critical infrastructure at any means that they can apply through physical security, or also surveillance security, hired security as well. And as Corman 2000 noted, that the threats to America's critical infrastructure have really been taken so seriously to justify more federal funding. Private companies often lack the resources to prepare for low probability, high impact events. So basically what they're trying to say is that although the private sector is out there and has resources, they don't necessarily train and prepare for the event of a catastrophic disaster. So they cannot fully support everything in the event of a catastrophic disaster, but they can, but sometimes have resources that we need, such as airplanes. One mission I remember that they always practiced was to survey an area in the event of a disaster, because they would need to know how to respond to the disaster, let's say tsunami or hurricane. Once landfall happens, they have to strategize what would happen. This is where I played a role in the situation. I would bring a satellite, router, switch, computers, phones. In the event of a real disaster, we didn't have those. This was our backup to use these things to get communication. And this was provided on us private sector through a commercial line. And I learned that this private sector organization did this not only for us, but many other organizations across the U.S. that required disaster management and needed IT support through satellite services. This is one of the small things that I think private sector can help. But there's many other things, like I mentioned, the security of our roads and infrastructure. Although some things will be handled by the state, some things will be handled by the private sector, because they can do it obviously just a little bit better because they have access to technology. But they can also provide support by maintaining the things that the government needs, such as cybersecurity, but also cyber availability. Not having communications is very crucial, and this is where I think these protections matter when it comes to water or other things like the port of embarkation is something that they would talk about in Hawaii. And not only that, the breakdown of critical infrastructure. There was another island called Saipan, and Saipan had a really bad hurricane, and it knocked out their main generator, and they had to get a private sector company to bring this generator out to Hawaii and leave it there. And this generator provided this whole, not if I said Hawaii, I apologize. I meant Saipan. And in Saipan, this generator provided support for half of the island, because when that hurricane hit, it damaged all communications. And not only did FEMA need that generator up, the local community needed the generator up, and also they brought in supplies like water and food, which was also bought through the private sector. So some things that the private sector has can be then purchased through federal funding. And this is where FEMA is always practicing how would they use their resources to gain resources from the private sector to give back to the civilians without hurting other civilians. And sometimes the private sector can pre-stage some of these things in support. But part of the problem is, could they actually maintain it for the long haul? And this is part of their limitations. And this is also why I was very interested in this topic and used the Klein library within FEMA to do my research, which also helped me gain a better understanding of how preparedness and readiness for any event, whether through natural or cause and effect from a terrorist attack, whether they try to poison our water or attack our airports. Private sector can sometimes provide intrusion detection or better security through buildings, exits, and maybe what I'm trying to actually say is that's also part of the problem that FEMA had in the past, is that there are limitations on what they can or cannot do. And the same for the military. And that's where sometimes the private sector is better. They are not limited through these attaining certain means to get resources that they can provide to FEMA or the military if needed. We see this even in when they did combat zone stuff. They brought in civilians to support our food requirements because at the time all soldiers were needed on the front lines. But this can also be applied to a disaster management where they can FEMA can do their job of providing support through the private sector to bring food to people in need or water or any kind of resources in the event that one of our infrastructures is broken down, and that we can hire private companies to come fix, let's say, critical infrastructure, which integrity has been put in jeopardy. And that's why private sector can be very, very important in this type of situation, and that the collaboration between state and federal through shared communications through the private sector and agreements also to help give resources that are needed in the event of a disaster. And also, as Waiter in 2015 noted, the private sector's responsibility extends beyond providing its services. It also includes vigilance and innovation to assure the resiliency of critical systems. Because another thing that I've seen, for example, other resources that were applied to protecting our critical infrastructure was through education, and many times this education came from private sectors like Booz Allen, which is a company that would provide lessons learned that we needed. So sometimes we'd give them our doctrine and they'd create a whole class about what the needs and requirements are and how we operated and on a daily basis. It was pretty amazing to see that. I had never seen that applied in the military. Usually we gave our own classes, but I also see how that could limit us, and that's why the private sector can sometimes do better because they're not beholden to certain things. And also something that I'm trying to explain about the critical infrastructure is that not only how important it is, but how much we don't realize that if we're cut off, are we ready? Are we able to adapt and be resilient to bounce back in a certain situation? Do we have the plans and analysis to be able to assess a situation? And this is where the private sector can come up with think shops, think tanks, like I was explaining. Booz Allen would come up with these things for us. We pay them a lot of money so that they can come up with these strategies, and that's why I found this topic to be very interesting to me. And I also felt like it made me see things differently back then too, because preparedness is something we don't think about on a daily basis. And I would like to close this out by saying my first brief was a little bit better because it was something that I could relate to, and I definitely learned a lot. And I think that this will only better prepare me for the future to always be vigilant and aware of my surroundings and have a better appreciation for our critical infrastructure and the protection. Thank you for listening.